Ron Howard has always been calm. A director who thinks the center of chaos. With dignity, self-control, and kindness. But when he was asked about the bad side of the business that brought him up, the way they looked changed. You wouldn't believe what those famous people did when the cameras. He once whispered gently that they had ceased. For him, Hollywood's golden period wasn't not golden at all. It was a world created on silence, violence, and taking advantage of people. A world where being famous made everything okay. The same performers that made America dream also ruined many lives. Dreams also ruined many lives. Behind closed doors. And now, decades. Ron Howard is willing to say later. Their names. Errol Flynn, the devil behind the grin. Before there was Jack or James Bond. Sparrow, and then there was Errol Flynn. A swashbuckling hero who was charming. Danger and a reckless need. On screen, he was the perfect explorer. Not on screen. He was more like a predator. Flynn was born in Tasmania in 1909. In Hollywood in the 1930s and became an overnight hit following Captain Blood, 1935. The studios made a fortune off of his charisma, but there was more to it than that. A man who was full of pride and addiction. His reputation changed by 1942. Toxic. Teenage girls Peggy Satterley and Betty Hansen said that Flynn had violated the law. Rape. The trial, which was all over the news. The newspapers split the United States. Flynn laughed through the testimony, making fun of the allegations as if his own fame made him not able to be touched. Warner Brothers hired the best attorneys. Fans set up camp outside the courthouse. And the heads of the studio bribed witnesses to disappear in secret. He was found not guilty. But his actions only got worse. In private letters that were made public later in, Flynn spoke about his conquests in 1978 and made fun of the women who were afraid of him. Ron Howard once said that reading about that challenge as a turning point when I understood. If they wanted to, Hollywood could defend monsters. Smiled for the camera. To the people, Flynn was still a bad guy. To insiders, he was a warning story. Cocaine, alcohol, and he lost everything because of money. His body fell apart in 1959, when he was only 50. Vancouver after years of being hurt. The autopsy showed cardiac failure, cirrhosis, and ulcers in the stomach. But for Howard, the true cause was easier. He passed away the same. He lived the same way. Absorbing everything and not offering anything. Flynn's narrative turned into a plan for the moral decline of Hollywood. A lesson that charm can cover brutality and that fame doesn't forgive anyone in the end. Kirk Douglas, the man who couldn't stop fighting. Ron Howard, Kirk Douglas, showed the absolute opposite of the best time in Hollywood. A man who talked of dignity and justice on television while making people scared and embarrassed. Iser Daniel Danlovic was born in 1916 to Douglas climbed up from his destitute immigrant parents. His way out of poverty through hard work. Willpower. By the time Spartacus did, he possessed everything that made him a global icon. Respect, money, and fame. But those people who worked with him remembered something deeper, a temper that was always fierce. Switched off when the cameras stopped rolling. Crew members talked about Douglas as hard to please and likely to get angry quickly. anger explosions that left people in crying. Deborah Padette, an actress, once commented, "He didn't merely want to take over a scene. He aspired to be the best at everything." Howard, who looked at Douglas's as a young filmmaker, later performances, said, "There's a kind of anger under. Wonderful smile, the type that makes you want to eat someone. Still alive." Douglas would feel that hatred for the rest of his life. Rumors about his behavior with women has tormented 4 decades in Hollywood. Biographers and people who know him well have said that he being involved in the rape of increasing in the 1950s. Natalie Wood was an actor when she was young. 16, a claim that came up after Wood's death and was repeated by her sister. Death and was said again by her sister. Lana's memoir from 2018. Douglas never was charged and the story was buried beneath the same mechanism of silence that protected so many strong men of his time. Even after he died in 2020 at the argument came back up when he was 103. Not as gossip but as a judgment on his presence on film sets could motivate and scare at the same time. Stanley Kubrick, who directed him twice, called the most motivated person I've ever met and the toughest to keep in check. Ron Howard once thought about the lesson from Douglas's career wasn't about skill or fame, but power. He thought Hollywood didn't have to follow the regulations, and yes, when Douglas said yes to one, many people thought of an old friend when they saw the honorary Oscar in 1996. A man looking for serenity. But for Howard, it was something different. The last act of a performer who had lived his whole life running away from his own demons. Underneath there was a truth behind the acclaim that Hollywood never wanted to face, that some of its best legends didn't build their legacy on fear, not cleverness. Faye Dunaway, the cruel queen. If Errol Flynn was a symbol of corruption and Kirk Douglas represented uncontrolled anger, then Faye Dunaway stood for something colder, beauty that is harsh. 2. Ron Howard, she was proof that evil exists in Hollywood didn't always have fighting. It sometimes got through control, shame, and an ego so big that it crushed everyone who was near it. Born in 1941, Dunaway's rise in Bacam, Florida, was very fast. From the movie Bonnie and Clyde, 1967, to Chinatown in 1974. She looked like a deity, like she couldn't be touched. The movies are cold and magnetic. But behind dazzling brilliance, stories of how nasty she was were talked about in secret in the industry. Crew members talked about her fits, her continuous requests, and the way she acted. Treat assistants like trash. Her mom, my beloved co-star Rutana Aldo, once commented, "You could tell that many were scared on set. Everyone was waiting for her to blow up." That movie was supposed to be dark. The picture of abuse turned into a mirror of Dunaway herself. Ironically, while portraying Joan Crawford, a woman who was well known for being, Dunaway is said to have copied someone for being harsh. The same way Frank Perry is the director. Later admitted that he thought stopping because of her violent fits of rage. She shouted and flung things at makeup artists, and once said no to film until the light made her look holy. Years later, Ron Howard mentioned her as an actor's example of what happens when craving for control evolves into emotions. Terrorism. The story didn't end there. During. Dunaway is said to have played the Wicked Lady. Hit a cameraman and spit on a crew member. About Don Juan DeMarco. She was alleged to have made assistants feel bad till production stopped for a day. Her old Faye manager Jay Bernstein once said, "Doesn't simply act like a diva, she becomes one. Them." By the 2000s, her name got to her. Hollywood came to a stop. Calling. Directors said they wouldn't work with her, saying she was too difficult to handle. After getting let go from a job in 2011, Dunaway's Broadway version of Tea at 5 said it was everyone else's fault. When a reporter asked Ron Howard about her. When asked about his legacy, he was gracious, although cutting. She worked so hard to be perfect. She forgot to be kind. Dunaway's descent didn't happen all at once. It was a gradual coming apart. The woman who used to took over Hollywood yet ended up alone. Avoided even when looking back at her movies that you made. To Howard, she stood for the cost of being mean, a warning that talent without empathy will eventually ruins itself. He once claimed that people talk about power, but in Hollywood, power without style becomes poison. The tyrant John Wayne of the West. Not many people were taller than John Wayne is a Hollywood star. For millions, he was the very essence of America. The brave soldier, the cowboy, and a man's man. But for Ron Howard, who grew viewing him on black and white TV, the truth behind that, the image of the rugged was much darker. When Howard learned what he was truly like, I stopped seeing the once mirrored hero. I noticed the thug who had his country like a dress. Marion was born Morrison in Iowa in 1907. Wayne rose via the studio setup by showing a story about men who can't be shaken by In the 1950s, he was more than just an actor. He was a set of beliefs. He thought dissent was a sign of weakness and treachery as development. On the sets of movies, he dominated by making people afraid. People who work as technicians, who didn't match his expectations, were swore at in front of everyone. Friend Christopher Mitchum, an actor, once said, "The air froze when Duke got mad. You either agreed with him or you were out of here." Howard later called that kind of the opposite of art in the air. It's scared. Acting like you're disciplined. Wayne's. There was cruelty outside of work as well. People knew him for putting women down, making fun of indigenous actors in public Western settings, and ignoring black performers who went against stereotypes. His Playboy interview from 1971 is still one of the most frightening papers of the best time in Hollywood. A talk in which he said that Native Americans were selfishly keeping land. Americans were greedily holding on to land that black folks weren't yet capable of governing themselves. And that movies required guys, not people who complain. The statements made people angry decades later. When they came back, they showed not a nationalist, but a man who was stuck in hate. Wayne, on the set of The Searchers, had a lot of problems with director John Ford because he wouldn't stop playing Ethan. Edwards was a bigoted, revengeful Confederate. As understanding, Ford pushed back. Wayne said no. In the last cut, the character's brutality came through, but so did the actors did not care. Ron Howard, who afterward went to USC to study that performance, Stated, "It's scary because you can't. It's hard to determine where the part ends and the guy begins. Starts. Even in his last years, Wayne never got better from cancer. Said sorry. He called critics weak. And said that his problems were caused by the changing culture. Being alone. He died in 1979 at the age of 72. Many people call him an American icon. But, to directors like Ron Howard, his story turned into a warning story. Evidence that power based on bias doesn't get old. It turns into bitterness instead of wisdom. Howard once remarked that the myth lived on, but the man who did it never deserved the legend. Roman Polanski, The Shameful Exile. 4. The name Roman Polanski belongs to Ron Howard. Stood for the one truth in Hollywood. Never wanted to deal with that smartness. Can exist alongside evil. I liked his movies before I realized who he truly was. Howard once said. Then I got it. Having talent doesn't make someone innocent. It hides them sometimes. The rise of Polanski was very fast. In 1933, she was born in Paris to parents from Poland and a survivor of the Nazis. Occupation, he looked to be meant for sadness long before fame. His big break. Movies like Knife in the Water and Rosemary's Baby made him a genius in the eyes of detractors. Called him a visionary who turned paranoia into poems. But the gloom that the things that haunted his movies weren't made up. It was a picture of himself. In March, the illusion broke in 1977. Polanski was taken into custody for sexually assaulting Samantha Gay, who was 13 years old, following a photo shoot. Shoot at Jack Nicholson's house in Los Angeles. House. The proof was too much to ignore. Polanski admitted to having intercourse that was against the law with a child. He ran away before he was sentenced. The U.S., where he fled to France and never came back. Hollywood split in 2. Some people criticized him, while others defended him. Him as an artist in pain. For Howard. Then a new director, the response was very bad. They talked about art while he remarked years later that the child's life was broken. Afterward, Polanski's exile was one of the worst moral blemishes in Hollywood. He proceeded to direct movies in other countries and won an. The Pianist won an Oscar in 2003, which was a big deal. Howard said it seemed strange and sickening. The audience at the Dolby. Howard refused as the theater audience stood up and clapped. To stand up. I thought of the girl by herself. At 13 and how she must feel when people clap for her. Ears. The industry's willingness to differentiate genius from. He was furious with guilt. When Polanski won protesters in France's César Award in 2020 ran away. That moment meant a lot to Howard. Signified justice coming late, but not too late. It took 40 years for the world to say what should have been said the next day. That a monster doesn't get less scary over time. Because he can set up a shot. He said. In 2021, Vanity Fair. Polanski stays free in Europe. Not able to be touched, but tormented. His name is a synonym for hypocrisy. Howard's narrative is an example of anything that ruined the Golden Age. A method that keeps the artist safe and leaves the victim behind. Hollywood is forgiving. He once said with anger, anything. For as long. If the light is good. Mickey Rooney. The smile that told a falsehood. If Roman Polanski Mickey represented Hollywood's hypocrisy. Rooney was the illusion. The notion that attractiveness might make cruelty go away. For Ron Howard, who grew up watching Rooney's happy musicals on late-night TV, the finding out who he really was a shocked. Howard, he was the face of happiness, said one time. But behind that smile was sadness. And much worse, he spread it. Born Mickey Rooney in 1920, Joseph Yule Jr. was the first real child in Hollywood. Big star. He was already 18 years old when the actor in the US who gets the most money, MGM, made a fortune with his smile. An all-American boy who sings and dances his way into people's hearts. But at that time, fame scale messed him up early on. He got married 8 times, cheated over and over, gambled away millions, and made fun of those who loved. To him, Ava Gardner, his ex-wife, called the smallest man with the largest ego in the world. The biggest ego in the planet. Behind closed doors, it got darker. In 2011, his 8th wife, Jan Chamberlain, and the stepson was accused of abusing an elderly person and manipulating money, draining Rooney's stories while keeping him alone from family. But long before that, the harm Rooney did to other people was already famous. Former co-stars that he was unpredictable and rude. His best companion during the years was Judy Garland. During his time at MGM, he once claimed in private he could make you laugh 1 minute and kill you the next. Garland, under pressure from studio bosses and later hinted that they were emotionally broken. Rooney, not just the bosses, put the blame on her pain. In the 1960s, his career had fallen apart. Addiction. He went through bankruptcy and a controversy. All over. Rooney said in an interview in 1979, "I've lived 1,000 lives." But Ron Howard thought about it later and said, "Live them all for himself." Even when they were old. Rooney's bitterness never went away, even as he got older. He blamed everyone, even the studios and spouses, God, for his fall. When he passed away his estate was worth a lot of money when he died in 2014 at the age of 93. Less than $20,000. His body was first unclaimed, but later was. Friends buried him in Los Angeles following. Got money for a small funeral. 4. Howard, Rooney's tale was the last part of a pattern. Evidence that the golden age grins were fake. He made people laugh as he was dying. Howard said, inside. And maybe that's the most horrible thing of all, when agony turns into performance and no one sees it. 4. These stories were never Ron Howard's about getting back at someone. They were signs. It wasn't made of gold in Hollywood's golden age. Not gold at all. It was built on quiet exploitation and ruined lives that are hidden behind fame. And as he once said, the scariest monsters aren't in horror movies. They're the ones in the spotlight. Guards. Which of these 6 actors? What shocked you the most? The hunter, the smiling liar, or the tyrant? Please tell me in the comments.